We will have the conversations that few are prepared to have, and more importantly, conversations centered on rationality. Subscribe now to listen to Rational Voices with Sunil. Delighted to welcome a Premier League footballing legend in Matt Le Tissier, an amazing advocate for Premier League football. So many of the listeners will know him from his time at Southampton as a football player, and more recently some of the stuff he's been doing in terms of the media. I suppose we'll start with Southampton. I was reading earlier on today, I didn't know this, but apparently at one stage you were close to joining my club, Chelsea. Is there any truth behind that, or was it close or not so much?
I wouldn't say it was particularly close. There was interest from Chelsea; they did want to buy me, but I kind of didn't really. I was happy where I was, so I didn't entertain it, and I never actually spoke to anybody from Chelsea.
What do you think? Because you're almost rare in today's modern day football to be a one club man. What kept you at Southampton? Because you're obviously like one of the top Premier League players. Your record speaks for itself. What kept you at? Was it out of sort of loyalty, or like what kept you at Southampton?
Yeah, I think there was several reasons really. Loyalty was one of those. I think I always felt like if I left Southampton, they got relegated, that I'd feel a bit responsible for that in some ways. So there was there was that sense as well. I also had a chance to join Spurs when I was 21 and had agreed to do so, but my fiance at the time didn't want to live in London, so I had to make a decision there. And I put family first before my football. There was different reasons at different times, really. But I also enjoyed being the big fish in the small pond. I've never shied away from admitting that. I like the fact that Southampton, were relying on me to help them stay in the Premier League. And that's something that I thrived on.
What I think most fascinating, I can kind of remember maybe more towards the end of your career than the start. My dad would probably talk more about your earlier days, but for me, I more remember towards the end. But just looking and reading about in terms of your career with England, and obviously you got an England cap, which is incredible. But I find it very hard to believe that you only got 8 England caps, and I think a lot of people, even my sort of age, who would have seen you throughout the Premier League videos, the history, the record books, find that very confusing in the fact that you weren't able to play as much. Is there a particular reason as to why? Is it just big club bias kind of thing? Because it sounds like it's hard to understand why you didn't get more caps and play more for England.
Yeah, again, it's never as simple as it just being one reason. I think there are probably a combination of factors. I think one of them was the media's portrayal of me. I got labelled very early on as being unfit and lazy, and never kind of managed to shake that tag off during my career, despite scoring over 200 goals in over 500 games. If I was really lazy, there's no way I'd have been able to do that. So that kind of probably played a part in it. Yes, there was probably a part that I was playing at one of the smaller clubs in the Premier League. Players at the bigger clubs, I think, were always better thought of because obviously their team were challenging higher up the league, and I think that had an impact on England managers as well. And then you've got to take into consideration the fact that when I turned Spurs down in 1990. The manager at the time was Terry Venables. He went on to become the next England manager after Graham Taylor. And then in 1995, when I turned Chelsea down, Glenn Hoddle was manager of Chelsea at the time, and obviously he went on to become the next England manager. So I probably didn't endear myself too well to those managers. So it's probably a combination of all three of those things.
It's again talking that era. Obviously, England historically, and the problems, a lot of them came from penalty shootouts in terms of not going through, and your record is pretty remarkable. I think I always knew your record was really good. I didn't realise how good it was up until maybe last week, where you're 47 penalties out of 48, which is fairly sublime. There's a couple of things I want to ask about that. One, in terms of the mental strength, like what were you doing in those moments? Because clearly it's a problem for England have had for, even beyond even today, carrying on. What was your mentality when you're taking these highly pressurized spot kicks in terms of the world watching you? And was it just blocking everything out? And then secondly, how, again, going back to the England thing, surely it would make sense just on that basis alone to have Matt Le Tissier in the squad just for the sole purpose of putting him on in extra time in Germany, Argentina, whatever. So there's the kind of questions I have there.
Yeah, I mean, the penalty one would seem pretty obvious to me. I think if I was the England manager and I had somebody there available to me who could pretty much guarantee that he was going to score when he comes to a penalty shootout, on top of the fact that, I wasn't, just an ordinary player. I was a goal scorer. I was a goal creator. It would have made sense. It would have been very easy to put me in an England squad, I think, and justify that decision. But obviously, those managers chose other players above me, and that's their prerogative. They're the manager; they have to make those decisions. In terms of what was going through my mind when I was taking penalties, I think it's been something that I was always able to do, was to be able to deal with high pressure situations and not get flustered and stay calm in those situations. I think that's the biggest thing if you want to take penalties. You've got to be able to calm your mind, and calm any nerves that might arise, because there's no doubt when a penalty is given, when the referee blows to the penalty spot and you're the penalty taker, I defy anybody not to have butterflies in their stomach when that decision gets made, But then once it's been made and those butterflies have come and gone, you've got to focus on the task in hand. I had a particular technique which worked for me, and that's what I would say to anybody who asked me to coach them in taking penalties. I wouldn't expect everybody to copy what I did. I would expect them to find a routine that's comfortable for them, and also just try to help with any little tips that I can give them in terms of what I was doing, what I felt like helped me a little bit. And that was always to not overcomplicate things, to keep it pretty simple. I had two options when I took a penalty. I either went to the goalie's right or the goalie's left. Not once in 48 penalties did I hit it down the middle. Oh, wow. So I never overcomplicated things, didn't give myself too many choices. So my brain wasn't cluttered when I was going up to take a free kick. I was able to keep a clear head, and I was also able to kind of look at the goalkeeper a little bit as well. And if he moved a bit too early, I was able to spot that and adjust my penalty accordingly. So when people tell you, when you're taking a penalty kick, you should never change your mind, I don't really adhere to that theory, because I many times I changed my mind a fraction of a second before I was just about to shoot.
It's just remarkable. Again, we've seen with England and the difficulties in penalty shootouts, and we've had over the last 20, 30 years, and to see your record as strong it is. I think 90 minutes voted you as the greatest penalty kick taker of all time, ahead of Cristiano Ronaldo, Messi, Cantona. Mark van Basten was high up there, but you came at number one on their list, and it's just remarkable, the mental toughness to do that. And the theme of this general podcast is about freedom and talking about that sort of stuff, but just carrying on a little bit more on the football theme, there doesn't seem to be too many players like yourself that exist right now in football. I know it's quite a topical thing at the moment, the last year or two. I know Pep Guardiola's got a bit of criticism for it. I can kind of see it with Cole Palmer, who kind of reminds me of the sort of throwback player with that sort of creativity. You can, I know nowadays everyone's obsessed with dribble completion, pass completion, all that sort of stuff. Why is it? Why are we not seeing players like yourself, me growing up, Zola, that these kind of profile of players exist in football? Because I feel like it's a reoccurring theme that's going on, not just in England. I feel like in Europe, where we're not seeing these kind of players anymore.
Yeah, I think football has become a little bit obsessed with systems, as opposed to individual brilliance. I think managers try to make the game more about them than about the players. So everybody is focusing on what formation people are playing, the style of play. Everybody's got to pass out from the goalkeeper because Pep Guardiola does it, and you've got to copy him. And I think so that's one of the reasons why I think you don't see as many kind of free-spirited, creative players as you perhaps used to, because everybody is obsessed with the formation and having a particular job in a particular formation. Whereas players like myself and Zola and Bergkamp and people like that, we were players who weren't really kind of made to fit into a system, if you like. We were players who would just see how the game was progressing and then go and put ourselves into positions on the field that the opposition wouldn't expect us to pop up in. And that was one of our great strengths, I think, is that we were able to be a little bit unpredictable in a time when a lot of teams were playing 4-4-2, and if you played 4-4-2 against 4-4-2 and the teams were fairly evenly matched, it could be quite a dull game. And you've got to do something a little bit different to break the formations, and so I think that's what players like myself and Franco and Dennis were very good at.
Going back to the Southampton, you're clearly, they still visualise it to this day. I went recently to Southampton, and you're still visualised as as they call you, the god there. And is that still an amazing feeling now, all these years later? When you go to St Mary's, is it still an incredible feeling when you get the support that you get?
Yeah, no, it is amazing. I kind of did an interview on the pitch at half time in the Nottingham Forest game earlier on this season. I think it was the first home game of the season, and the reception was amazing. And it's mad to think that it's 22 years since I retired, and yet still you kind of get that kind of reception from the fans. So they're obviously people with very long memories for a start, but people who appreciated what you did for their football club. I had a big part to play in the history of Southampton during the 80s and the 90s, and I'm very proud of that. So it's lovely to go back to St Mary's. I mean, they still sing a song pretty much every game where I can hear my name in the middle of this song that they sing, and it's mad. And even Mick Shannon, Mick Shannon gets a mention. Mick was the club's record goal scorer. I couldn't quite catch him, unfortunately. And they still sing a song where they mention both me and Mick, and it's lovely that people still have those memories of us.
It's remarkable. I couldn't, I obviously I didn't see too much of you play being young, even TV, whatever. I didn't see it as much. I think I, like a lot of people maybe my age, will really see sort of Soccer Saturday on Sky and Sky News in terms of that, and we can touch on that a bit later. But I think one of the interesting things that would be really good to get your viewpoint across is the sort of politicisation of football. I mean, sport in general, but in particular football. For me, the only thing where it starts is kind of BLM is the first time where I really saw it as a football fan, but I'm sure it was going on before. Did you ever, going back as a football player first and forgetting about media, was politics really involved in football when you were growing up, 80s, 90s, playing in the Premier League, First Division?
No, I don't really recall it. Certainly not in the early days. When it was the First Division for the first 6 years of my career. Premier League came in 1992. I'd already made my debut in 1986, and so kind of probably, I think towards the back end of my career, probably maybe middle of it, there started to be some campaigns that they would encourage us to get involved in terms of the Kick Racism Out campaign. So I remember that one. I don't remember too many others that we got involved in, but it's quite ironic that the BBC, the FA came up with all these rules to stop players from lifting their shirt when they scored and having messages on their shirt underneath. They come up with all these rules going, no, this isn't, you're not allowed to do that. That's all wrong. And then in 2020, all of a sudden, Black Lives Matter badges were all over the shop, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, it's okay for political messaging now, is it? And so, I found that a bit bizarre, and I made my feelings on that known at Sky. That was probably one of the things that cost me on my job. And then all the LGBTQ stuff that's come in, the rainbows and all that stuff. I think that needs to be kept out of sport, quite frankly. What people want to do in their own private time is fine. I don't think that we should be hijacking football for those kind of ideas. If you ask me, I think sport should be left alone. Shouldn't be politicised. People have enough to cope with in their lives. People go to watch football matches for a bit of an escape, and they don't want to be bombarded with propaganda while they're watching their football matches. And I think it's out of order. And I think it's come about because politics was so unpopular, and so they couldn't get their messages across through the normal channels. Because they couldn't get people to engage politically, or enough people to engage politically. So they had to hijack something that was incredibly popular, and they saw football as that vehicle. And I think that's exactly what they've done, and I think it needs to stop, and we need to get rid of all political campaigns, any propaganda out of football. You've got to just let football be football and let people enjoy it.
Any football fan that I speak to, when I say a genuine football fan, somebody who watches football regularly, goes to games, whatever, I can't think of one that wants to see any of this political messaging. And that's what I find really interesting is I think a lot of these groups and a lot of these campaigns are quite almost done by, if you like, the elites of this country, the elites of the world, whereas football is the working man's game. So I find it really bizarre how it's infiltrated football in a way. I can get it maybe in other sports, but maybe you can help answer that, because I don't see how in football it's been able to almost infiltrate its playing, because football is not like maybe cricket or rugby, where there is a difference in terms of, if you look at the players, their background, the fans, the background, it is generally more the working class people who tend to support football clubs and are the ones going to games, and they're the ones who probably least care about a lot of these political messaging, but somehow it's been incorporated, which I find strange. Is there a reason why?
I think that's exactly the reason why they've targeted football, is because they couldn't get those people to engage politically and to indoctrinate them with their ideologies. And I think that's exactly why they chose football to infiltrate. And there's been a huge, massive shift in football club ownership down the years. So the models that used to be back in when I first started playing football, where a lot of the board of the football clubs were made up of local businessmen who loved the club and ran it almost as a side business, if you like. And then you look at what's happened today, and there's very few football clubs now that are actually owned by British people, and certainly less owned by people from that city where their football club is. And so it's a massive shift, and I think that shift has allowed the infiltration to happen.
It's I find it really, I think, going back towards before we go on to 2020 and all LGBT, BLM, and all of that sort of stuff, is I find it interesting to know, or if you what the kind of signs maybe you saw in the build up towards that, where you saw, whether it's in the media or in football, where you started to see maybe where it started to maybe affect maybe your job as a player or media or people in sport. Because I often think you've made your views quite clear, which we can talk about later, but I often feel like there's probably many footballers and many people in media who I would probably argue the majority are going to agree with you, but would probably never say. When did you start to see in football where, not crossing a line, but where you started getting a bit annoyed, where you started seeing some campaigns? Was it literally just BLM, or was there stuff in the build-up where you were thinking this is getting a bit weird, or this is changing?
Yeah, I think the first one was probably the Rainbow Laces campaign. Was the first one that I just went, hang on a minute, why are we having to promote this kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Why is football being chosen to promote that? I thought that was a little bit odd. And again, it's because football is so popular that people choose football to be able to get into the majority of people in this country. And I think it's a pretty simple explanation for it. They just know that so many people love their football that it's an easy way to get their message across to a lot of people and indoctrinate people.
When it happened with, I think, Harry Kane initially with the rainbow armband, I remember thinking in the build up to the tournament, this is so unfair on Harry Kane, like, as in he's got to ask these questions. We should be talking about England going on to win the Euros and potentially compete, and he's having to answer questions. And I kept thinking, how can this be a positive thing for the England camp to be focused or have any kind of attention away from winning the Euros? And I felt really sorry for him, because I remember the media really kept him asking, and he answered it, I think, fairly well. But I remember having so much sympathy for him in terms of having to put up with these sort of questions. And obviously we've seen that just escalate now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably obviously comes from the top of the FA, but you've also got to have a manager who's happy to implement it. If Gareth Southgate wasn't such a yes man, he might have stood up to it and gone, do you know what, this is a distraction for my team. I don't need this distraction. We need to be focused on the football. I think that's one of the things that was pretty poorly dealt with, I thought. I think you're exactly right. The team heading into a major championship already have enough hang-ups about penalty shootouts and all that kind of stuff and the pressure from the country without having to start answering questions about things that have nothing to do with football. So I think you're absolutely spot on.
I've got my whole thing in terms of FA managers, in terms of why I think like a Mourinho or Pep Guardiola will never be England managers. So I just don't think the FA have the courage to deal with these managers are serial winners who do everything it takes to win. I don't think they would be able to withstand these kind of profile of managers. I think somebody who's a bit more tolerant and a bit more accepting, which is bizarre because you'd think football, we want to win, that's the whole purpose, but it seems to be changing. Hopefully, general comments on Thomas Tuchel, England manager. Do you think 18 months' time he can do a good job, win the World Cup? Do you see him as a good appointment?
I mean, he's a good manager with a decent track record. I personally feel like the rules need to be changed where I think to qualify to manage a country, you should have the same qualifications as you need to play for that country. I think, you're all part of the same team. Why should there be a different, mode of qualification for the manager as opposed to the players? So, yes, obviously, if we win the World Cup and Thomas Tuchel's manager, that'd be great. I think it would probably take a little bit of shine off of it that it's not an Englishman managing an English team, right, which I think is what every country should strive to have. I think I think it's not a great indictment on our own system that we can't teach or we can't have English coaches that are good enough to take the job at national level. That we've got to look to other nationalities to do that.
I think going on terms of England and football and stuff, and I think what I found really interesting during your spell in terms of media with Sky, and if you look at when you first started compared to now, and when you watch Soccer Saturday and you watch the TNT equivalent, the difference is quite stark in terms of, I always found Soccer Saturday quite funny and quite fun to watch, even if you're not necessarily you're not going into granular detail about everything, but it was almost the effect of you guys all together and that kind of, if you like, the banter, you're rubbing off each other, and we're not watching the game, right? So it's more you buy into the crew, the group of team there. It seems very different now whenever I watch it now. Do you think that's part of, again, the politicization of football in terms of when it comes to even stuff like this?
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like that they're trying to suck the joy out of anything that goes on in life, basically. And I think the best thing that you can do to counter that is to be happy in as much as you can in all parts of your life. Just try and be happy, because the people at the top hate it. They don't want you to be happy. They want you to be miserable, and they want you to be downtrodden. They want you to be easily pliable and easily manipulated. And so so I've chosen to be as happy as I possibly can. And yeah, you're right. I've tuned in a couple of times to Soccer Saturday. There's no personality about the show anymore.
No, it's completely changed. And when, like you say, there's nothing better than playing football. The next thing is watching it, and then we're not watching it, so we're watching people reflect on it, and you're not going to get the joy of watching it. So naturally, that kind of the back and forth you would have with Jeff and everyone else, it was kind of part of the fun of it. And it doesn't seem to be like that now. Were you ever, in terms of Sky? We know about the BLM drama and stuff with Sky in terms of them pretty much enforcing you guys to all cooperate. But even prior to that, did you notice any changes in terms of, were you ever censored, if you like? Were you told that you got to be careful about certain things? Or
yeah, actually, a few years before all that, I made a comment to Charlie Nicholas, and it was a flippant, and it was quite clearly a joke, but it was about Charlie Nicholas not buying a drink and being tight because he's Scottish.
Right.
And so I made that quip on the show. It was just a bit of fun. Nobody got offended. And then apparently we had somebody complain to the show, and the following week I had to I had to apologise on air the following week.
Wow.
It's just, and I just thought, blimey, and I think that's kind of where I started to think, wow, hang on a minute, this is people are policing your words here. You're just having a laugh, and you can't even have a laugh without people getting offended. It's just crazy.
I'm guessing Charlie in that situation was probably not remotely offended or
Not one bit.
crazy. I mean, when that whole saga, the BLM saga, if you don't mind, explain for people who haven't heard it. But when that was all going on, what was going through your mind in that course of that day and the following week?
When I had to wear the badge, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, in reference
Yeah,
to
yeah. So when we came back, we were just about to go on air, and our producer came to us about a minute before we go on air and gave us all these badges that he wanted us to wear. And I looked at it and I thought, blimey, I'm not particularly comfortable with this, because I kind of knew what that organisation stood for.
Yeah.
And I said to him, do I have to wear this? And he looked at me and he went, it's probably in your best interest if you do. And I was like, okay. And then so we're now just about to go on air. So I put it on. I was so uncomfortable all afternoon. And at the end, as soon as we came off air, I took the badge off and I went back to the producer and I said, look, so you can have this back. I said, I won't be wearing that again. I said, I'll quite happily wear the Kick Racism Out badge if you want me to. So I'm not a racist, but I don't agree with that organisation. I'm not comfortable wearing that badge on the television. And so that was it. I became the first person to refuse to wear the Black Lives Matter badge. And as things turned out, I think I was particularly justified in making that decision, given what we now know about where that money was funneled to. What the organisers of that organisation, what they were spending their money on. And so, I was very comfortable with that position.
Well, it's bizarre, and I remember a lot of that when that was going on, and to me it's quite simple. You go on Black Lives Matter, they have a website. Within the website, they have a manifesto. It's a political organisation. It wasn't just they have a whole thing about you shouldn't own your own house, and there's a whole. You can go on the website, you can see manifesto. So for me, it was quite straightforward. This is not a civil rights movement or whatever. It's a political manifesto. So it's crazy. But what I found really crazier was how it had got into sport in terms of players kneeling before games and all that stuff. I couldn't understand how no one was really awakening to what was in front of all of our faces, and so I find that really strange. And were you alone in this? Like, you don't obviously have to say names, but were you alone in terms of when you went to your producer and said, like, I don't want to wear this badge? I think that's perfectly normal, rational.
I think I was fairly alone on that show, because I don't think any of the others had really kind of taken much of an interest in what was going on in the world at the time, and they were quite happy to just comply, and that's fine because they didn't know any different. So I was pretty alone, although I did get quite a few messages afterwards privately from people who were at Sky still, or other media organisations, saying to me, but I completely agree with what you've done, and fair play for you for doing it. But they wouldn't say that publicly, because obviously that would be career suicide.
Do you think that? Well, I think it's probably a silly question. Do you think that contributed to you not being on Sky now, the BLM saga?
I think that was one of the reasons. Yeah, I do. Yeah, they would never be able to admit that, but I believe that was kind of the start of things, along with the stuff that I was posting on social media about my opposition to lockdowns and all the restrictions that were being put in place because of COVID, and so I think along with that, they were probably two of the reasons, and the fact that we were taken over by Comcast,
right?
Just before 2020. And they were very heavily into the DEI stuff, and our programme on a Saturday afternoon was 5 middle-aged white blokes.
Yeah,
that wasn't a look that they were particularly comfortable with, I think. So a combination of all those reasons, I think.
I think that was going to be my follow-up question. Just do you think necessarily if you weren't white and middle-aged that this would have happened? I've got this thing on this show, some listeners would have heard where I often joke that if I was a middle-aged white man, my vocabulary is like this big. I would be very scared to say very few things. Being Indian and being reasonably youngish, I feel like I can probably say more than maybe yourself. Do you think that played a part in terms of if, let's just say, somebody else, maybe different gender, different race, was saying what you said? Because again, you've got everything you said about BLM. There's facts behind it. You can go on the website. COVID-19, there's many people like myself who would have agreed that COVID restrictions were far too strong, lockdowns went on for too long. Some of your reviews are you've got a massive base of people that would agree with you, both not necessarily right or left, across all the spectrum. Do you think if you weren't necessarily white, middle-aged, that you would have been thrown away like this, if that makes sense?
I'm not so sure. I think the overriding thing was probably my opposition to what the mainstream media were pumping out as propaganda. And given that I was working for one of those news organisations, albeit in the sports department and not the news department that was pumping the propaganda out 24/7. So I think it was probably more to do with the fact that I was going against the grain with what my company were pumping out on behalf of the government.
Right. And again, going into the sort of that sort of Sky era of commentary, well, naturally lots changed with Premier League and Sky coming in, the money in terms of Premier League. I think most people would say it's probably been for the good. If we separate with football and the politicisation, do you think I don't know how to word this, if maybe Sky hadn't done what they'd done with the Premier League, we would be where we are in terms of just both the sport in general in England and some of the stuff that you've had to put up with?
Oh, there's no question that football changed once Sky came in and the money that's been pumped into football since that. You can argue the toss whether or not it's all been good or all been bad. I'm sure there's a balance to be had there. Obviously, the players got well remunerated on the back of the TV revenue. So the players will not be wanting to probably to bite the hand that feeds them, first and foremost, which is probably why you never saw I don't think I saw a single current Premier League player actually come out publicly and criticise the lockdowns or criticise anything about the COVID jabs. I didn't see anybody, and there was a handful of them who refused to take the knee.
Yeah.
And of course, the media go after them and castigate them for doing it, and label them as racists, as the media do when they have somebody that doesn't kowtow to what they're trying to tell everybody. You'll normally see a few hit pieces on them, trying to label them as far right racists or homophobes or sexists, all that kind of stuff, all the nonsense that goes on. And that's what they do. That's how they keep people in line, and they make examples of people who go against the grain, so that the other people who think like that just decide to actually go, oh, I can't do that because look what happened to him.
Well,
that's how they control people.
Well, you look at what's happened with the armband recently. Mark Gray for Crystal Palace, and we saw the amount of scrutiny he got for literally just writing religious I love Jesus on it and his armband. And I don't think anything's come from here, but there was a lot of scrutiny in terms of him doing that, being forced to wear the armband, but different for Sam Morsey for Ipswich, when it seemed to be completely okay for him not to comply with the thing. So there definitely seems a bizarre double standard to it. My personal feeling, and you will know better in being in the football pitch and being around football players, most players don't want to do this. I can't think of too many that would. Is that correct?
Well, I can't speak for the players nowadays. Obviously, I don't know many of them personally, but I can tell you from the 17 years I was involved, there was not one player who was in our changing room, campaigning for any political ideologies to be worn on our shirts. So I can't imagine that football has changed too much in that regard.
I sympathise with them all the time because I think it just takes away from what they're trying to do in terms of the football pitch. And as fans, we don't want that kind of division. I don't want to sit next to somebody when we're arguing about politics like this is the escape that we just want to watch. We're different colours, different views and whatever, but we're watching, we're united by our love for our team, and it just seems it creates more division than unity. And I think we're a football nation at the end of the day, and I think it's yeah. I think that's a frustrating thing for fans, and I'm guessing even more frustrating for yourself having played the sport and been in media.
Yeah, it's a huge frustration. A lot of football fans that I speak to, that they say the very same thing. They just keep politics out of sport. It's pretty simple. Then you don't get these conflicts. You don't get people having to make a decision, or decide to write something on an armband, or decide not to wear an armband and get scrutinised for it by the media. It shouldn't be happening. They shouldn't be put in that position in the first place. Everyone should be left alone and just enjoy the sport.
Another thing that it seems you've almost had. I don't know. Well, I'm so happy to have you on this platform. It's so amazing to have you. You've had so many hit pieces. I feel like in the last 3 or 4 years, in terms of every single tweet, everything you've done is scrutinised in a way that I don't think many ex-footballers, and you are obviously a Premier League legend and you've got an amazing record, but I would argue that you've had a lot more scrutiny than maybe people who are even more famous. You're like people even in the sport, and it feels like you've had a lot more attacks towards you. Which of the things that you've tweeted or said do you think has got you the most attacks for? The ones that they've really gone after you in terms of mainstream media?
I think that probably I retweeted a tweet from Unity News Network, which was about the Butcher massacre, and just questioning the veracity of that actual event. And so, I wanted to just put into people's minds that, in times of war, both sides will engage in propaganda, and we can't be blinded by the fact that, our government aren't, completely clean, and they're going to tell us the truth all the time about what's going on in war zones. So my point was that, but, during times of war, both sides will engage in propaganda. And but because I retweeted that as an example of it, which in hindsight I could have used a better example. It was quite emotive at the time, and so yeah, and I apologise for that. I said I could have used a better, but people knew what I was trying to get at, really, because I made it pretty clear in my follow up tweets. And but no, yeah, they still went after me, and. That's just one of the many times they've gone after me, because apparently I'm a COVID denier and an anti-vaxxer, or other things that I've been called, despite the fact that I've never denied that COVID existed, and also despite the fact that I'd had every other vaccine until this particular one, which I decided not to take because of the lack of long-term safety evidence, any safety data. So yeah, but because I can, I'm able to use my own brain and do a bit of critical thinking and do a little bit of my own research and come to my own decisions because of that. Yeah, I get labelled all these, the deniers and the anti stuff, and it's just childish, petty, childish stuff from the media, and I've learned to ignore it over the years.
It's crazy because I think I recall this tweet in terms of the Russia-Ukraine stuff, and I've found this just bizarre. I think like it automatically just, if you say Russia is bad, that doesn't necessarily mean Ukraine equals good. Like it's not all binary, it's not all black and white. It's complicated, and and I think sometimes social media, the mainstream media, like to make it black and white, and a lot of the time it's really, really complicated, and we're not living in that region, and a lot of us have never actually even been there. So to make such strong alliances or anger towards, I think is really unfair. And I recently, not that long, got in a bit of trouble for essentially saying it's sad that Ukrainians are dying and Russians are dying, and I just want people not to die. And it was like I was a Russian apologist because
No, it's crazy, isn't it? How you can say the same thing about both sides, and yet people just take the one side of it and just jump on that. Yeah, you're just incredibly balanced and just want humanity to get on and get along in peace. And that doesn't make you an apologist for anybody. It makes you a decent human being, in my book.
Agreed, and I think that's what's really bizarre about some of the stuff you've said, and that constant conspiracy. I saw even the article where it said you're the greatest penalty kick taker in football history, and you rank number 1 by 90 minutes. But the first thing they say isn't you're the greatest penalty kick taker in history, isn't you scored 47 out of 48 penalties. It says despite his views on COVID vaccines and climate change, and then it says Matt Le Tissier was an incredible penalty taker, blah blah. But the line, and you're the only one they have that for. So I was checking afterwards for Cristiano Ronaldo, Marco van Basten, everyone, no one else they have anything for. Yours, the only one that starts with that line, which is just absurd. And I've seen you even clarify, even with the climate change stuff, where you've made it quite clear, and your tweets are there, your messages are there, but they've labelled you a certain way. And you've just said about the vaccines that you've had other vaccines, but you will still be called COVID. How do you deal with that sort of on a day-to-day basis? Does it really bother you, affect you, or do you just kind of?
No, not really. I think because in actual real life, because the online stuff, you just don't know who you're dealing with a lot of the time. You've got people like the 77th Brigade. You've got all sorts of bots and trolls. The Mutton Crew. I don't know if you've come across them. All these people that are basically paid to jump on your tweets and influence people's opinion of you, and they get their replies straight underneath your tweet, so it's the first thing people see. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on social media that I know goes on, and so I don't really take a lot of notice of it. I tend to judge everything by my real life interactions with people in face to face who want to talk to you. And I've got to tell you, in the last 4 years, I think I've had one person who was brave enough to shout at me that I was an anti-vaxxer. He was about 10 yards away in a crowd of people at the time, and he was the only one that was able to. That was the only thing that he could find. And but I can tell you, 99% of people that I talk to are all they want to talk about is my football. And if they do want to talk about the other stuff, it's to go, fair play to you for standing up and saying what we all think.
I can, from everything you've said and like the stuff you said, I think most rational people would agree with yourself. There's not a lot of stuff there that you've said. You've got evidence behind everything you've said, and it's supported by so many people. Talking of sort of COVID and the jab, I've got friends and family in the medical space, and many of them did not want to take the jab. Many of them, these are medics, doctors, dentists who did not want to take the jab, and they were essentially forced to take it, otherwise they're going to lose their jobs. But I know so many people who quit the industry out of that. But again, those people will never be spoken to on mainstream media. They'll never get the interviews for those profiles. Instead, they'll pick on people in like tinfoil hats or wherever, and they'll use that as the brigade. But there's so many people, even in the medical-based industry, who this affects directly, who would tell you, I don't want to do it. It's not tested enough. It's not been around for long enough, and I want future children. Blah blah blah. All this sort of stuff.
100 side effects.
Yeah.
Which nobody knew about when they were taking them. I haven't spoke to a single person who took their first jab and knew what the side effects were of that jab. All they knew was that it was safe and effective. It's very safe because it's got 1,200 side effects to it.
And what's absolutely even more crazy about it now, and what I sometimes get frustrated with what's going on in the news and stuff, I would love and respect the current government or whoever to come out and say, we made some serious mistakes, as in both Tories, Labour, we support it. We made some serious mistakes over the last 3 or 4 years. What we know for a fact, it didn't actually stop transmission, and this got barely reported. It literally
wasn't even tested whether it stopped transmission or not, and yet they told everyone it was going to stop it.
So I would, if they put their hands up and said, we made some serious mistakes, we overreacted or whatever, and we're going to learn from this, but it's still not quite like that. There still seems to be almost not a cover-up, but a lack of questions, and I think that's really dangerous.
There is a massive cover-up. That COVID-19 inquiry was an absolute joke.
Again, it's just, and I think we'll see the side effects, and we are, like there's people.
We are. Yeah. Every conversation I have with people now, it's either, a member of my family's had a stroke, I'm going to a funeral, just been diagnosed, a friend of mine has just been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Nearly every conversation I have centres around somebody's health of somebody who's close to them, and it's not nice.
It's sad, and for me, where I really was starting to speak up about this was around May time, and I can't remember where I saw it, but essentially somebody had a doctor had talked about how in May 2020 was the lowest recorded month of cancer cases in the United Kingdom since they've been recording data, and he essentially was saying cancer hasn't stopped. This is absolutely terrible news. What's happened is people are so scared to check when they normally have a cough, and I'll be honest, I'm guilty of it. Like I'd say probably to my dad, you got a cough, just stay at home, like you don't need to go to the GP. Whereas that could have been the first stages of, lung cancer, some sort of cancer. He goes there, early stages, gets treated, happy days. But what happened in May was we were so scared that essentially no one was going to the GP, no one was going to hospitals. So he talked about how that month was like, he was really post-traumatic. This is like horrible. You get COVID, you've got a 99% chance of survival, even higher than 99.8, whatever. And you get early stage of stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3 cancer, your chance of survival diminishes crazily. So go out there and basically go to your GP. But we were so scared to do that somehow our minds had almost been tricked and coerced in a way where it was scarier to potentially get COVID going to the hospital than having early stages of cancer. And I think that's the reason why we saw so many deaths the year after, and we're going to continue to see them, I think.
Absolutely.
But going on, in terms of the climate change stuff, that's another thing that you've got a lot of stick for, and you've clarified this so many times I've seen on your social media. How would you say it to people now? Because there's this. The moment I'm sure you'll clarify and you'll still be called lots of different things. But if you could round it off in a way, or like say it in a way that expresses your views in a. If I give you time to just fully express what you think in terms of your general views on climate change.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the climate has never been stable. The whole time we've been on this planet, the climate is always changing. Climate is always changing. So the bit that kind of got me was when they started, all the scientists in the 70s. I think one says we're going to just be entering an ice age in the 70s, and then just a short couple of decades later, all of a sudden there's global warming, and I was like, well, hang on a minute. I was around in the 70s when they were telling us there was going to be an ice age, and now they're telling us it's global warming. So, right, okay, so they're admitting they got it wrong in the 70s. Nobody's come out and admitted they got it wrong in the 70s. So then what really kind of pricked my interest was when they stopped calling it global warming and they shifted it to climate change, which obviously meant, my brain goes, why they changed its name? And it's clearly because the globe isn't warming, and they needed an all-encompassing way of still making people frightened, and so they could call it climate change, and that way any kind of different weather that we have comes under that umbrella, and they can go, oh, it's climate change. That's why we're having a hurricane and that's why last year we had 39 degrees Celsius. Climate change. There's more hurricanes. Climate change. And it just captures everything. And so the fact that they've had to change all these things have just made me go, I actually don't believe a word you say now. Quite frankly, the climate has always been changing. I would rather leave it to Mother Nature to sort out, quite frankly, because I would trust Mother Nature over any psychopathic governments or people who are even above those people who actually are the puppet masters that control the governments. So that's where I stand on it. The climate's always been changing. The CO2 nonsense. CO2 is the gas of life. That's what I was taught at school. It's the most important gas we've got, and the more we have of it, the greener the planet becomes. And how's that a bad thing? So yeah, I think I've seen enough evidence during my lifetime in 50 years to know that the scientists don't always get it right. And the fact that the whole climate change thing, it's amazing how, this thing that's threatening our entire world, isn't it a coincidence that the way to deal with it is to make the poor people poorer and the rich people richer? And that's the biggest thing that makes me go, I'm sorry, that's bullshit.
Agreed.
Because I'm sorry, it doesn't add up. People are making millions and billions of pounds out of this nonsense, and the only people that are suffering are the people at the bottom end of the food chain. I
couldn't agree more. It just seems a way of control and, like you said, making people poorer. We saw Tissier Starmer go to Azerbaijan, Baku, take 400 and whatever people with him on a plane to talk about climate change, and you're thinking this is just pure irony. You see them getting private jets, and we're told, Matt, don't go on family holidays, Sunil, don't go on family holidays, stay at home, but we're going to keep flying around in private jets because we're going to cause more carbon emissions than you would do in this one journey in your whole lifetime, but we're doing for the good of humanity. And I've seen it with Lewis Hamilton, incredible Formula One driver, probably Britain's greatest. But I see it when he speaks about climate change, and I find it so ironic. You are in an industry that is literally the worst possible industry when it comes to the climate. You drive around a petrol-oiled fuel car, you drive around in private jets, you're going around the whole world, and you're going to tell us to stop going using the aeroplanes, driving to work, and it affects, like you say, the poorer people. It affects people who are trying to drive this nonsense of ULEZ, having to upgrade their cars because to comply with some nonsense thing that they've kind of created, I think, for control. So I think it's really sad that it's tough to have these conversations. We've given you a few minutes to talk about it there, but I think it's a shame you don't get the opportunity to have these conversations, and then the moment you start to speak, it's shut down.
I think that's the thing that I didn't like about March 2020, was that we weren't allowed to have any kind of debate on the television. We weren't allowed to have an alternative opinion. Nobody was allowed to put other facts in front of people and put their point of view across and let people decide for themselves. We were just battered with one side of the argument the whole time, and that's exactly what's happening with climate change as well. Because there's plenty of scientists out there who will deny that man-made climate change is a problem, and yet these people aren't allowed a voice. See, what really gets me is that we're kind of 4.5 years down the line, almost 5 years down the line now of the COVID stuff, and more stuff is coming out about what the MPs were doing, partying while everyone else was in lockdown, all that kind of stuff. And we know now it wasn't the threat that they told us it was going to be. We know what happened in care homes with the do not resuscitate orders, and all this stuff's coming out. And there were a lot of doctors who did come out and take the opposite point of view, and they were cancelled. The GMC went after them. They weren't given a voice. I had people like Mike Yeadon, who came out from the pharmaceutical industry and questioned the stuff that was going on. And these people have been proven to be right in what they were saying back in 2020. And yet, so you would have thought, now that that's the case, 4.5 years down the line, you would have thought that those people who have proved to have been right 4 years ago, when you're talking now, you should go back to those people, because those people got it right. Yet still in the media, they're going back to the same people that got it wrong in 2020. They're still giving those people a platform to speak nonsense in 2024. Now that tells me that there is something so wrong in our media, that these people are still given a voice on the media when they got it so wrong 4 years ago, and all the people that got it right are still the ones that GMC are still going after to cancel their medical licenses.
It just seems controlled to me. I don't know what else it is in terms of other than just outright control, because I can't understand why. Like I said, I think a lot of people have so much more respect if they acknowledge that we made some mistakes. We're human beings, we made mistakes. I still don't think that's enough, but it's a starting point where, so at least you can start to build something. When somebody says, okay, we made some mistakes, could have done this better, we've got the stats, let's share them. And we can't repay and we can't go back to what we did, but we can try and learn. But when they try and cover and do all this sort of stuff, it creates more and more anger, more resentment, lack of trust, and I think that's kind of where we are now.
One of the most ironic things now is that when I first decided I wasn't going to take these vaccines, and people were throwing the anti-vaxxer line at me the whole time, and I was defending myself, and I was happy to defend myself against these accusations, and all these accusations came, and in the end, those accusations, those people throwing those accusations at me, they've actually now turned me into an anti-vaxxer. I wouldn't take another vaccine in my entire life ever again. Not a chance. Not one. I'm now an anti-vaxxer. I wasn't when I decided not to take the COVID one, but because of the reaction of people and because of what I now know about the pharmaceutical industry, I would never take another vaccine as long as I live.
What have you learned about the pharmaceutical industry in this vaccine experience? Because funny enough, I was having this conversation with my wife earlier. We were talking about naturally America is a country where vaccines are given on a mass crazy scale. We've seen the links with
Yeah.
autism. We've seen so many high profile people. I was watching a clip on Jim Carrey talk about this in 1990 where he talks about how there used to be, prior to 1990, average person would have about 10 vaccines. It went up by 26, so 36 on average. And it's like, what's changed in 1 year where we're now having to inject, and we should actually, and he was saying, I'm not an anti, but again, he was, given the disclaimer saying, I'm not an anti-vaxxer, I've taken vaccines, but I just don't think that we should have to take, without questioning, we should actually be asking questions. Do we need vaccine? There is a pharmaceutical element who are going to profit from this. And I don't think in a pharmaceutical boardroom they're going to sit there and they're going to say, you know what, we're going to make a loss this year for the good of humanity, that we're going to make a loss, as in we're not going to make profit this year, we're going to suffer this year because we don't actually need to push out vaccines. Again, that's America, so it's a bit different. What's changed you now from everything that you've learned in last year to now be more, not just COVID, but just in general vaccines in the UK? What stops you from taking one, let's say next year?
So I think what stops me is the lying that's gone on. I think the fact that they've parroted the safe and effective narrative, the fact that they said to us that it was not, take these vaccines because you don't want to pass it on to anyone else. Yet it transpires that they were never tested as to whether or not they stopped transmission or not. So we were basically lied to. And then I started looking into it, and I looked into how much these pharmaceutical industries have been fined down the years for bad practices, for bribing doctors. And they've been fined billions of pounds. And yet they're still allowed to keep pumping. Not only just are they still allowed to trade, but the governments are still openly giving them contracts for things and then granting them immunity from prosecution when their products cause harm to people. And I'm like, none of it makes sense. None of it makes sense. If they want to produce these vaccines, take that liability away from them and make them pay if they injure somebody. Do you know, if somebody gets injured, this is one thing that really annoys me. If somebody gets injured in this country by one of their vaccines, our taxes pay that person who has got injured, not the pharmaceutical company. It doesn't come off their bottom line. They're still making loads of profits from it. The compensation scheme is coming out of our taxes. So how does that make any sense? So that's just a small reason why I don't trust the pharmaceutical companies anymore. And thinking logically about it, they would never ever want to cure a disease, because if diseases were cured, they'd go out of business. So their whole business model is give things to people that make them sick, and then produce something that eases their symptoms. And then it's a circular business, and they'll never go out of business. They'll always make money, and it's very, very simple.
What I found interesting, you kind of alluded to earlier when you were talking about no one in football speaking out against vaccines. Now, the only high-profile sportsman I can really think of is Novak Djokovic, and he was incredible in the way he acted, and I think
look what they did to him in the media.
Crazy, and and he in some ways has been validated, like from post and this thing. And I kept thinking when he did it, it's like this is arguably one of the most fittest, healthiest human beings that there is in terms of I think he has 2% body fat or whatever. Like he's in incredible shape, plays these long games by himself. It's not a team sport. If there's somebody who knows about health, then I trust it to be somebody like him. Why have we not seen other sports people speak out about this? Now, you obviously ex-football player, and again, you would have been, at the gym regularly, fitness, all that sort of stuff. Why have other footballers not necessarily spoke about it? Because I would have presumed if you're a top football player playing in the Premier League, you'd be really concerned. These guys have nutritionists at their houses. They have people cook their own meals. Visit all this stuff. Why are none of them necessarily saying what we've just said in terms of, are we not worried about what we're putting into our body? We're athletes. We've got limited time to play in our career. We can't take no risks, and I trust my human body. I'm super fit anyway. So I think, why would we not see any of those guys potentially speak out?
I think a lot of them privately did have those thoughts, and a lot of them didn't get vaccinated, but chose not to speak publicly about it.
Right.
You know, when I played golf with a couple of Premier League footballers a couple of years back. Both of them admitted to me that it was probably about 50% of their squads had taken the vaccine, but 50%
Wow.
didn't.
Wow.
And they were at two separate football clubs. So I think the propaganda again was strong with, you know, the Premier League coming out and saying, you know, most of our players are vaccinated, all that kind of stuff. I think it was a bigger percentage of players that weren't vaccinated than they told you.
Right.
But again, I think it was that self-preservation thing, because it would have been career suicide for them to come out and criticise them, because they would have been labelled, the media would have gone after them, no other football clubs then would have touched them, and they would have not been able to earn as good a living as they were earning at the moment. And I think that's one of the reasons why they didn't speak out.
That's why I think what Novak did was incredible for being such a, you know, the number one tennis player to come out and do what he did.
Yeah, I think there's two things there with Novak. I think he's obviously financially secure, and secondly, I think he knew that his career was, you know, didn't have, you know, loads of years left in it. You know, he's
Right.
had a long time in tennis, so I think he was in a position where he could afford to do that. I think if he was maybe a 22, 23-year-old Novak Djokovic,
Good point.
you know, we may have seen something slightly different. I don't know. I mean, I'd hope not, because I hope he still have the same morals and the same ethics that he showed a couple of years back.
That's a valid point. You know, I kept thinking somebody like a Cristiano Ronaldo and the way he talks about his health and stuff like that. You know, I would presume those kind of profiles of people would have been very skeptical about putting anything in their body. We're seeing what's happening with even Mudryk at Chelsea right now. Like, I can imagine as footballers, you're so conscious of what goes on, especially in the modern day, in terms of their body.
I think, yeah, in my time there wasn't quite such a fixation with this kind of stuff. You know, we had the occasional drug testers came in and that kind of stuff, but you know, the performance enhancing stuff wasn't really around in my days. We didn't really have that problem.
Right, right. I mean, it's been amazing to chat to you, Matt. There's so much more I want to touch on and
But
discuss.
do it again.
But yeah, it'd be great to do it again. We have a sort of closing wave to finish off the podcast, which is essentially, I always ask the guests, what is a unpopular opinion that you have that you think should be popular? So it can be anything you like. It can be football, it can be some of the stuff we've talked about today, it can be trivial, it can be anything. But what is an unpopular opinion that Matt Le Tissier has that he thinks should be a popular opinion?
An unpopular. Okay, and my unpopular opinion is that I think nobody should take any more vaccines again.
That's it. That will cause.
I caveat that with until they've been properly tested.
Okay, okay. Well, thank you so much, Matt. It's been amazing to have you on.
Pleasure, Sunil. Good talking to you.